Jack Turner stood on his porch, watching the last of the winter snow melt into the muddy earth of Fairgrove. He was a firefighter once. At 58, he'd fought every kind of fire, except the one that burned quietly inside him. His wife was gone, his friends scattered, and his only companion was Rex, an aging rescue dog with more scars than bark. The town had forgotten his name, and maybe, he thought, God had too. But that night, as the wind howled through the pines, Rex began to bark, sharp, desperate, insistent. Out on the road, half buried in snow, sat an old car. And inside it, a young mother clutching her son, frozen and afraid. Jack could have turned away, but something deep within him, something divine, stirred back to life. When he opened that door, he didn't just save two strangers. He reignited the flame of faith that had nearly gone out in his own soul. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if you too believe that sometimes God's miracles arrive wrapped in snow and silence. Chapter 1. The Quiet Flame. Snow fell in slow, deliberate swirls over Fairgrove, Vermont, a small town that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the wind, half asleep beneath the weight of winter. The world was hushed, blanketed in white, except for the faint hum of a wood stove coming from the old cabin on Maple Ridge Road. Inside, Jack Turner sat by the fire, his weathered hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee. At 58, Jack looked like the kind of man the years had carved out of stone and smoke. Tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair that curled slightly at the ends and a beard that had surrendered to time more than vanity. His eyes were a soft gray blue, the kind that once held courage and now carried a quiet weariness. He had spent 30 years as a firefighter, running into burning buildings, saving lives, pulling strangers from the edge of death. But there were some fires, he'd learned, that water could never put out. The old clock on the mantel ticked, the sound loud in the silence. Jack's cabin was modest, pine walls, a sagging couch, and a faded photograph of his late wife, Emily, resting above the fireplace. In the photo, Emily's auburn hair glowed like copper in the sun, her smile open and sure. She had died 6 years ago, cancer stealing her breath in quiet, merciless inches. Since then, Jack's days had folded into one another: work, coffee, snow, sleep. At his feet lay Rex, his companion through every lonely year since. Rex was a mixed-breed rescue dog, part Labrador, part German Shepherd, sturdy and golden with eyes the color of warm honey. He had a small scar running down his left flank, a souvenir from the fire Jack had pulled him out of nearly a decade ago. Rex had been a trembling puppy then, his paws burned and his whimpers hoarse from smoke. Now he was 10, old enough to limp a little when he got up, but still loyal as sunrise. Jack bent down to scratch behind the dog's ear. "You and me, old boy," he murmured, still kicking. Rex thumped his tail once, as if to say always. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Fairgrove was a quiet town, the kind where everyone knew everyone, and where winter could make loneliness feel heavier than snow. Jack worked part-time at Miller's lumberyard, stacking planks and loading trucks. His hands were still strong, his back still straight, but there was a slowness to him now, a gentleness that came from seeing too much fire, too much loss. People in town liked him, said he was kind, dependable, the sort who would give you his last dollar and apologize it wasn't more. But few knew that when the nights got too quiet, he sometimes woke gasping from dreams, the sound of crackling flames echoing in his ears, the face of the man he couldn't save years ago, flickering in the dark. That morning, as Jack stirred the embers and poured more wood into the stove, he caught his reflection in the window, the beard, the creased eyes, the shoulders that had once carried so much. "You used to fight fires," he muttered to himself. "Now you just keep one lit." Rex lifted his head, sensing the melancholy that always hung around his owner like a shadow. The dog padded over, pressing his snout against Jack's knee. Jack smiled faintly. "You always know, don't you?" He pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The air bit at his cheeks, sharp and metallic. The world was white and still, except for a crow perched on the mailbox, watching him with black, unblinking eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, muffled by the snow. Jack climbed into his old pickup truck, a rusted Ford that coughed before it started, and drove toward town. He passed the frozen lake, the bakery with its frosted windows, the library where the same lights burned every night. Fairgrove was beautiful in its stillness, but to Jack, It sometimes felt like a photograph, a place where nothing moved except time. Meanwhile, across town, life was not still at all. In the small gravel lot behind the old bus station, Lila Carter sat in the front seat of a worn-out Chevy, trying to keep her son warm. Lila was 28, slender but strong, with brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail and eyes the color of wet earth, tired but alert, as if always scanning for danger. Her coat was 2 sizes too big, a thrift store find, and her fingers trembled as she rubbed them together for heat. Beside her, Noah, her 8-year-old boy, slept curled under a blanket, his small hands clutching a toy fire truck missing a wheel. His cheeks were pale, lips slightly blue. The car's engine had been off for hours to save gas. Lila exhaled, her breath fogging the windshield. She'd told Noah they were on an adventure, that things would get better soon. But the truth pressed hard against her ribs. She had nowhere left to go. Her nursing job at the hospital in Rutland had vanished when budget cuts hit. One late rent payment led to eviction. One friend's couch turned into another's pity. And now, this. The car, the cold, the silence of a world that didn't look back. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer she barely believed in. Just a little more time, Lord. Please. The sound of snow against glass filled the night. Lila thought she saw a light flicker from the ridge, a cabin maybe, faint and golden in the storm. For a moment, she wondered who lived there, what kind of person could afford warmth while the rest of the world froze. Then she smiled sadly and leaned back, holding Noah closer. Across the ridge, miles away, Jack Turner sat in his chair, looking into the fire. Rex stirred, his ears twitching. Outside, the snow grew heavier, the wind howling like a memory. And somewhere in that blizzard, a battered Chevy engine coughed weakly, once, twice, then fell silent. Jack's head lifted. Rex growled low in his throat. The fire flickered, and for the first time in years, Jack felt something stir inside him, a strange, uneasy feeling that something or someone was about to knock on his door. Chapter 2. The Fire Within. The storm arrived before midnight, howling like a living thing. Snow lashed against the cabin windows, and the pine trees bowed low beneath its weight. Jack Turner stood by the door, one hand resting on Rex's collar, as the old dog growled softly at the wind. Jack could feel it too, that strange crawling tension in his gut. The kind of instinct that never really leaves a firefighter, no matter how many years pass. Something was out there. He stepped out onto the porch, pulling his heavy wool coat tighter. The wind bit at his face, and the air smelled of iron and cold. Rex trotted beside him, tail low, nose twitching. Jack squinted into the darkness, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the swirling snow. The road was nearly invisible, a white blur, but then, there, a faint glint of metal beneath the drift, half buried. A car. Jack's pulse quickened. He trudged down the path, boots sinking deep, Rex barking once as if to urge him on. The truck's door handle was frozen solid. Jack yanked it once, twice, then used his gloved hand to wipe the window. 2 shapes inside. Still. Too still. "Hey! You all right in there?" he shouted, his voice nearly lost to the wind. No response. Panic flared in his chest, the same instinct that had driven him into countless burning houses. He slammed his shoulder against the door until the latch snapped open, a rush of frigid air bursting inside. A woman sat slumped over the steering wheel, her arms around a small boy curled against her chest. Jack reached in, fingers pressing against the boy's neck. A pulse, faint but there. "Come on," he muttered. "Hang in there, kid." The woman stirred, blinking groggily. What? Her voice cracked with cold. "Name's Jack Turner," he said firmly. "You're freezing out here. Come on, let's get you inside." She tried to protest, mumbling something about being fine, but her lips were nearly blue. Jack didn't wait for permission. He lifted the boy into his arms, he couldn't have weighed more than 60 pounds, and helped the woman stumble out of the car. Rex circled them anxiously, whining. The woman's name, he soon learned as they trudged back toward the cabin, was Lila Carter. Up close, she looked even younger than he'd first guessed. Late 20s maybe, but exhaustion had carved fine lines around her eyes. Her brown hair clung damply to her face, and her cheeks were raw from the cold. The boy, Noah, was limp but breathing, his dark lashes dusted with snowflakes. Inside the cabin, the heat wrapped around them like a blessing. Jack laid Noah on the couch and covered him with blankets while Rex stood nearby, tail wagging uncertainly. Lila hovered close, her hands shaking as she touched her son's forehead. "He's just cold," Jack said gently. "We'll warm him up." He poured water into a kettle and set it on the stove. The fire crackled, filling the room with light and the scent of pine smoke. Lila looked around the cabin, humble but tidy, walls lined with photographs and old tools. "You live alone?" she asked, her voice small but cautious. "Just me and Rex here," he replied, nodding to the dog, who was now sniffing Noah's shoe. "He's the friendly sort, unless you're a squirrel." Lila managed a faint smile. "He's beautiful." "Saved him from a fire about 10 years back," Jack said, stirring a pot of soup. "Guess we've both been a little singed since then." They fell silent for a moment, listening to the wind outside. Then, hesitantly, Lila spoke. "We were on our way to Rutland. I was hoping to find work there, at the clinic. The car died. I didn't want to bother anyone." Jack turned from the stove, his expression softening. "Freezing to death isn't bothering. You did the right thing staying put." He handed her a steaming mug. "Drink." She hesitated before taking it. "You're kind. Not everyone would open their door in a storm like this." He shrugged, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Force of habit. You spend half your life dragging people out of fires. You stop thinking about whether they're strangers." They ate in quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy but healing. Noah stirred awake halfway through, blinking up at the ceiling. "Mom?" he murmured. "I'm here, sweetheart," Lila whispered, stroking his hair. Then Noah's eyes drifted toward Rex, who was sitting patiently beside the couch, ears perked. "Doggy," he said sleepily, reaching out a hand. Rex moved closer, pressing his warm muzzle against the boy's fingers. Jack chuckled softly. "He's got good taste. Rex doesn't usually warm up to people that fast." Lila watched, something easing in her shoulders for the first time that night. "He reminds me of our old dog," she said. "Before everything." Jack didn't ask what everything meant. He'd seen enough sorrow to recognize when someone wasn't ready to talk about it. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, snow piling against the windows. Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight. Jack told a few stories, harmless ones, about the pranks his old firefighting crew used to pull, about a kitten they once rescued from a chimney. Lila laughed, quiet and surprised, and Jack realized it had been years since laughter had filled these walls. By midnight, Noah was asleep again, Rex curled at his feet like a guardian. Lila sat by the fire, her face soft in the glow, eyes reflecting the flames. Jack leaned back, feeling something stir deep in his chest, a flicker of warmth he hadn't felt since Emily died. He told himself it was just relief, just gratitude that he had found them before it was too late. But as he watched the woman and her son sleeping in his home, he knew better. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name yet. Outside, the wind began to calm, but a new sound carried. Through the stillness, a distant low rumble, like thunder rolling under the earth. Jack frowned, glancing toward the window. "That's strange," he murmured. "There's no thunder in a snowstorm." Rex lifted his head, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. And then, faint but unmistakable, came the echo of another sound, metal groaning, wood cracking, somewhere down the ridge. Jack's heart kicked in his chest. He stood slowly, every instinct from years of firefighting roaring back to life. "Stay here," he told Lila, already reaching for his boots. Rex was already at the door, waiting. The storm had only just begun to quiet, but something else out there was calling him into the cold once more. Chapter 3. The Weight of Ashes. Morning came pale and colorless, a gray light spreading over Fairgrove like breath on frosted glass. The storm had passed, but the snow lingered, heaped in drifts that reached the cabin's windowsills. Smoke rose thinly from the chimney, curling into the quiet sky. Inside, Jack Turner stood at the stove, frying bacon in a black iron pan, while Rex snored softly by the door. 2 days had passed since the night he found Lila and Noah. They had stayed in the cabin as the roads remained buried in snow. Jack had offered it without hesitation, though he didn't quite understand why. He'd lived alone for so long that he had forgotten the sounds of other lives, the shuffle of feet, the laughter of a child, the soft clinking of dishes not his own. Now those sounds filled the small house again, and strangely, it didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt like air after smoke. Lila was sitting at the table, her brown hair tied loosely back, wearing one of Jack's flannel shirts that hung large on her frame. She looked rested, though faint shadows still haunted the corners of her eyes. She was stirring sugar into a mug of tea, her fingers trembling slightly, not from cold, but from the fragile relief of having survived something she hadn't been sure she would. "You make coffee that could wake the dead," she said, glancing at him with a small smile. Jack shrugged, flipping a strip of bacon. "Spent half my life waking people in worse shape than that. Habit dies hard." Across the room, Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, building a small tower of wooden blocks Rex had knocked over earlier. The boy's cheeks had regained color, and every now and then he'd giggle when Rex bumped his nose against the tower, pretending to help. Lila watched them both, the big dog and her little boy, and for the first time in months, her heart didn't ache quite as sharply. "He's happy here," she murmured. Jack turned, his expression softening. "He should be. Kid deserves a roof and a fire." After breakfast, Jack pulled on his coat. "I'm heading down to Miller's," he said. "Roads are clearing. They'll need hands to move lumber again. Maybe they could use another pair." He hesitated, looking at her. "You said you worked in a clinic before, right?" Lila nodded. "Nurse's aide, but I can do just about anything if it pays." Jack nodded approvingly. "I'll talk to Hal Miller. He's a decent guy. Might find something to keep you busy." Hal Miller, the owner of the lumberyard, was a burly man in his late 60s, with a salt and pepper beard and a permanent scowl that hid a good heart. A lifelong Fairgrove resident, he'd known Jack since their high school football days and never stopped teasing him for being the quiet one who ran into fires for fun. Hal had a reputation for being gruff but fair, and when Jack mentioned Lila, Hal simply grunted, "Anyone willing to work in this weather deserves a chance. Have her come by." That evening, Jack returned home to find the cabin smelling of stew. Lila was stirring a pot over the stove, the soft hum of an old country tune escaping her lips. Noah was at the table, pencil in hand, working through a battered math workbook Jack had dug up from a drawer. Rex lay under the table, his tail wagging lazily every time the boy's foot brushed him. Jack paused at the doorway, taking it in, the glow, the warmth, the faint laughter. Something in his chest tightened. For a fleeting second, it felt like Emily was there again, humming the same kind of tune, filling the same kind of silence. "You didn't have to cook," he said finally. Lila smiled without turning. "You didn't have to save us." They ate together, the kind of quiet meal that felt more like communion than routine. Between spoonfuls, Jack told stories about the lumberyard, about Hal and his endless complaints about taxes, about the time Rex stole a sandwich right out of a police officer's hand. Lila laughed. Noah giggled so hard milk spilled, and even Rex seemed proud of himself. But that night, when the laughter faded and the fire burned low, Jack found himself awake again, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the snow glowed faintly under the moonlight. In the distance, he thought he saw the shadowed outline of the old Fairgrove fire station, the place that had been shuttered for years. The place where Tommy Harris had died. Tommy had been more than a partner. He'd been like a younger brother. A man with sandy blonde hair, freckles, and a grin that could melt anger. 10 years ago, a warehouse fire had swallowed him alive. Jack had been there, trapped under a collapsed beam, screaming Tommy's name as smoke clawed at his throat. They'd told him afterward it wasn't his fault, that he'd done everything he could. But guilt was a stubborn ember. It never died, only dimmed until something stirred it again. Now, as Jack sat in the dark, that ember flared. And as if sensing it, Rex lifted his head from the floor, ears pricked, eyes glinting in the dim light. The dog gave a low, uneasy growl, staring toward the back door that led into the woods. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered. Rex whined softly, then padded to the window, staring out toward the ridge. The same ridge where the old station stood, its roof sagging, its bell tower half collapsed. Lila's voice startled him. "You okay?" she asked quietly from the doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders. Jack forced a small smile. "Yeah, just an old dog and older ghosts." She stepped closer, her eyes gentle. "You miss it, don't you? The work." He looked at the fire, the faint reflection of flames flickering across his face. "Sometimes, but I think it misses me more." Lila tilted her head. "Then maybe it's not done with you yet." Before Jack could reply, Rex barked suddenly, a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the stillness. The dog's fur bristled, his body rigid. Jack moved to the window. Through the trees he could swear he saw a faint orange glow, a light where there should be none. His stomach tightened. The firehouse. He blinked once and it was gone. The silence returned, heavy as snow. Rex whimpered, pressing his head against Jack's leg. Jack didn't say it aloud, but the truth burned in his chest. Maybe Lila was right. Maybe the past wasn't finished with him after all. Chapter 4. Smoke and Sunlight. The first thaw came quietly in the early days of March. The snow along Fairgrove's roads had begun to melt, leaving behind veins of dark earth and the scent of wet pine. Jack Turner leaned against the fence outside his cabin, breathing in the sharp, damp air. For the first time in months, he could hear the slow drip of water instead of the constant hush of falling snow. It was a small thing, but it made him smile. Inside, Lila was packing her lunch for work at Miller's. She'd been there nearly 3 weeks now, steady and reliable, earning the respect of the men who at first doubted a woman could handle lumber work. Her hands were calloused, her arms stronger. The color had returned to her cheeks, and though she still wore that thrift store coat, she wore it with quiet pride. Noah was feeding Rex bits of toast at the table. "Well, Mom says I can help Uncle Hal stack the smaller wood piles tomorrow," he announced proudly. Jack grinned, touseling the boy's hair. "You'll outwork me soon, kid." It was almost peaceful, almost, until that night. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of smoke long before the sound reached them. Jack had been reading by the fire when Rex suddenly sprang to his feet, barking at the door, loud, sharp, urgent. Jack froze, nostrils flaring. That smell, he'd know it anywhere. Not from the stove, not from any chimney. This was open fire, dry timber, oil. He grabbed his coat and ran outside. Over the ridge, an orange glow pulsed against the sky. The Miller's warehouse. "Lila!" he shouted, already sprinting through the snowmelt. She appeared in the doorway, hair loose, face pale in the firelight. "Stay with Noah!" But she shook her head, determination flashing in her eyes. "There are still people working late at the yard," Rex barked again, already bolting ahead. Jack didn't argue. Some instincts were too old to fight. He ran, boots slapping the slush, lungs burning in the icy air. The closer he got, the hotter it grew, the air trembling with heat and panic. Sparks flew into the night like fireflies from hell. At the edge of the yard, Harold Miller, Hal's older brother and the warehouse manager, was waving his arms wildly. Harold was a thick-set man in his 70s, with a bristling white mustache and the stubborn pride of someone who had spent his life running things his way. "Jack!" he shouted. "There's someone inside. I think Tommy's nephew. He was closing up." Jack didn't hesitate. "Call 911. Get everyone back." He tore off his coat, wrapped his hand in a rag, and kicked through the side door, where the flames were thinner. Smoke rushed at him like a living beast. His body remembered every motion, how to crawl low, how to listen for voices beneath the roar. "Hey, can you hear me?" he shouted into the dark. A faint cry answered, small, weak. Jack's heart lurched. He followed the sound through the maze of half-burned crates until he saw a figure, a boy of about 16, cornered behind a stack of lumber, eyes wide with terror. His name, Jack remembered suddenly, was Eli Harris, Tommy's nephew. Eli had the same sandy hair, the same sharp, earnest face. His jeans were singed and his hands trembled as he tried to push a fallen beam off his leg. "I can't move." Jack rushed forward, the old strength surging back into his arms. He heaved the beam aside, ignoring the pain as it scorched his sleeve. "You're okay, kid. We're getting out." Rex appeared out of the smoke, barking madly, circling them like a guardian. Jack coughed, eyes stinging. He pulled Eli up, slinging the boy's arm over his shoulder. "Follow the dog," he rasped. Outside, Lila had ignored Jack's warning. She was helping Harold drag hoses from the truck, trying to wet the ground around the structure. Her hair stuck to her face, her hands raw and trembling, but she didn't stop. When she saw Jack emerging through the smoke with Eli, she ran toward them. "Over here," she cried, pulling a blanket from Harold's truck and wrapping it around the boy. Eli was sobbing now, coughing so hard it shook his frame. Lila held him close, whispering, "You're safe, sweetheart. You're safe." Jack dropped to his knees beside Rex, both of them gasping for air. The adrenaline still hummed through him, sharp and painful. He looked back at the building as the roof began to collapse inward, the glow blazing against the night sky. By morning, what remained of Miller's warehouse was a charred skeleton, but no one had died. The Fairgrove Chronicle ran the headline 2 days later. "Retired firefighter, local nurse, and brave dog save teen in midnight blaze." Hal Miller found Jack at the yard later that week, his gruff voice rougher than usual. "You did good, Turner. The whole town's talking about it. They're adding your name to the memorial service next Sunday. You'll be honored along with Tommy and the others." Jack shook his head. "I don't need—" Hal cut him off. "It ain't for you, it's for us, for Fairgrove. People need to see the good that still burns." At the ceremony, the town gathered in the square. Snow glittered on the rooftops like ash turned to diamonds. Jack stood between Lila and Noah, Rex sitting obediently at his feet with a small red ribbon around his neck. The mayor, Evelyn Ross, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and the steady poise of someone who'd seen every hardship this town could offer, stepped forward. "Tonight," she said, "we remember those lost to fire and those who keep its light alive." When they called his name, Jack felt something shift. The guilt that had lived in his chest for 10 long years loosened its grip. He thought of Tommy's grin, of Eli's terrified eyes, of Lila's hands reaching through the smoke. He whispered, barely audible, "Not every fire destroys." Lila looked at him, puzzled. "What did you say?" Jack smiled faintly. "Some fires warm what's gone cold." As the crowd applauded, sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the snow. Rex barked once, sharp and joyful, as if to agree. Chapter 5. Dandelions in the Yard. Spring came to Fairgrove not with thunder, but with thaw. The snow melted into soft rivulets that carved paths through the yard. And soon, where the ground had been hard and gray, little dots of yellow began to appear. Dandelions, dozens of them, bright and stubborn, spread across Jack Turner's front lawn as if the earth itself had decided to celebrate. Jack stood on the porch, mug of coffee in hand, watching the slow rebirth of his world. His hair had grown longer, his beard a little whiter, but his eyes, those weathered blue-gray eyes, were alive again. He could feel it in the rhythm of his mornings, the sound of Lila humming in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, Noah's laughter mixing with Rex's gentle bark. For the first time in a decade, the cabin felt like a home again. Rex, older now, lay stretched on the porch boards, his golden fur dusted with flecks of gray. His movements were slower, but there was still a spark in him, an alertness in those honey-brown eyes whenever Noah ran past. The boy was in the yard, kicking a faded red ball, his thin legs darting through sunlight. "Rex, catch!" he called, and the dog gave a single, eager woof, lurching up to chase the ball a few feet before collapsing happily in the grass. Lila stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel. She'd just returned from her first week at the new Fairgrove Community Clinic, a modest building, painted cream and blue, run by Dr. Margaret Lawson, a short, round woman in her 60s, with a face both stern and kind. Margaret was known throughout town for her tireless devotion. She had a habit of calling everyone sweetheart, even when she was scolding them for smoking. She'd taken to Lila immediately, recognizing not just skill, but compassion. "You've got healing in your bones," she'd told her. "Jack," Lila said now, standing beside him on the porch, "they're opening the new wing at the clinic next month. Dr. Lawson wants me to supervise intake. Can you believe that?" Jack smiled, lines deepening at the corners of his eyes. "I can. You've earned it." She hesitated, glancing toward the garage beside the house. "And what about you? Are you really going through with it?" He followed her gaze. The garage door was open, sunlight spilling across the newly painted interior. What had once been a dusty, cluttered space was now warm and welcoming. Walls freshly paneled, shelves lined with blankets, a small stove in the corner. A hand-painted wooden sign above the door read, "Turner's Haven." Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figure there's plenty of folks out there who just need a roof for a night, somewhere to breathe." They had been talking about it for weeks, ever since the town had presented Jack with a small grant in recognition of his service. He had used the money, not for himself, but to build something lasting, with Hal Miller's donated lumber and the help of several townspeople. The garage had transformed into a temporary shelter for anyone in need. Travelers, veterans, families between homes. Just last night, they had welcomed their first guest, a woman named Amanda Brooks, in her early 40s, thin and sharp-featured, with a nervous smile and hands that trembled when she held her coffee cup. She'd lost her apartment after her husband's death and had been sleeping in her car until the sheriff pointed her toward Jack's house. Now she sat on the steps of the garage, knitting quietly, while Noah showed her his drawings. "She said it's the first time she's felt safe in months," Lila murmured, her voice low. "You did that, Jack." He shook his head. "No, we did." The sun climbed higher, lighting the meadow beyond the cabin. Jack walked down the steps, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. "Come on, Rex," he called softly. The dog lifted his head, tail wagging. They moved together to the edge of the yard, where dandelions swayed in the breeze. Jack bent down and plucked one, spinning it between his fingers. "When I was a kid," he said, "my mom told me dandelions were weeds, but Emily, she used to say they were wishes that learned how to grow." Lila smiled faintly. Maybe she was right. They stood there a moment, the silence comfortable, until Noah's laughter broke through again. "Mr. Jack!" he shouted, running toward them with the ball in his hands. "Rex says our house is happy now." Jack laughed, deep and warm, crouching as Noah barreled into his arms. "Is that so?" The boy nodded solemnly. "He told me." Jack looked down at Rex, who was lying contentedly in a patch of sunlight, eyes half closed. The dog's tail thumped once, twice, as if confirming it. Jack ruffled Noah's hair, his voice soft. "Well, you tell Rex he's right, because we finally found the fire that doesn't burn out." Noah grinned, racing back across the yard, the wind catching his laughter. Lila leaned against the porch railing, watching them with a look that was part peace, part disbelief, like someone who'd wandered through a storm and found her way home without realizing it. As the afternoon waned, golden light spilled through the open door of Turner's Haven. Amanda was still knitting, humming softly. Rex dozed beside her, one paw twitching in dreams. Jack sat on the steps, the dandelion stem still in his hand, feeling the sun warm his skin. For once, he wasn't thinking of the past or the fires he'd lost. He was thinking of now, of the fragile, persistent beauty of it. A breeze swept across the yard, sending the dandelions dancing, their seeds rising like tiny suns caught in flight. Jack lifted his face to the light and smiled. In the quiet bloom of Fairgrove's spring, we witnessed more than the story of an old firefighter and his loyal dog. We saw a reflection of what God can do when hearts choose compassion over comfort. Jack Turner didn't just rebuild a garage, he rekindled faith. Faith that miracles still walk among us, sometimes on tired feet, with calloused hands, and fur sprinkled with gray. Each dandelion in his yard became a symbol of grace, the kind that grows in unlikely places. It reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness can be seeds God breathes upon, turning ashes into sunlight. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of life, that no matter how cold our winters, the fire of love never truly goes out. It just waits for someone brave enough to tend it again. So, as you finish this story, pause for a moment. Look around your own life. Maybe there's someone who needs your warmth, your forgiveness, your hand. Perhaps God is waiting to work his next miracle through you. If this story touched your heart, share it so it may warm another's. Leave a comment below and tell us, where have you seen God's hand lately? And don't forget to subscribe so that together we can keep spreading these sparks of hope and faith.